there, Scary Parrish. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Eye on College Basketball podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, and leaky black. Kyle Boone is here with me. If you're watching on YouTube, you know what to do. To that like button. Shouts to Brandon Davies. And if you're not yet subscribed to the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube channel while you're here, please go ahead and knock that out. Let's get into it. I hope everybody had a fun and safe holiday weekend. I'm assuming John Calipari did, in part because on Sunday, the Arkansas coach secured a commitment from DJ Wagner, the five-star recruit from the class of 2023, who started 28 games for Cal at Kentucky this past season. Once Cal jumped from Kentucky to Arkansas, DJ entered the transfer portal. He visited USC, visited Arkansas. Ultimately, DJ Wagner decided to become the sixth former Kentucky player or signee to follow John Calipari to Arkansas. And his addition is why I moved the Razorbacks up to number 16 in version 26 of the 2024-25 CBS Sports preseason top 25 and 1 college basketball ranking. Strong Jaw, let's start here. Am I too high on Arkansas? Too low? About right? How do you feel about John Calipari's 8-player team?
First of all, 26 updates is absolutely ridiculous. Go get some sleep, GP. Go take a vacation or something. Go touch some grass.
I'm going to do both of those things sometime soon, perhaps even later this week.
No, I actually think that's probably about right. Maybe a touch higher than where I would rank Arkansas. But on its face, I think you can maybe justify it and do so, at a level that I think you can be confident with. This is an elite recruiting class that John Calipari is bringing in. He's got some big names coming out of the portal with Adu Thiero, John L. Davis, Jonas Adu. And I think there's been like a whole lot of hubbub, just like how Cal has built things over the years at Kentucky. It kind of reminds me a little bit of, the Arrested Development scene where it's like, well, did it work for those people? did it work for Kentucky? Well, no, it really never did, but they delude themselves into thinking it might, and it might work for Arkansas. I think that's probably how Arkansas fans are feeling right now. It's like, there's a lot of excitement because Arkansas really has not been built this way over the years under Muss, under previous coaches. And to be able to get high-level talent, to be able to get guys out of the transfer portal, to really kind of pick and choose who you want to bring in, I think is exciting for Arkansas. We'll see how it works out, but I think clearly validated as a top 20 team right now with DJ Wagner coming in. Basically, the entire Kentucky operation just moving from Lexington over to Fayetteville.
And that's the way it was expected to go. Like I wrote on Memorial Day, this is notable but unsurprising. I think we assumed John would be able to take some Kentucky recruits with him. He has. I think we assumed we would be able to take some Kentucky players with him. He has. And particularly a player like DJ that he's quite literally known since he was born. Yeah. What's interesting is right now Arkansas has 8 players. 3 of them are the sons of people who played for John Calipari, and 3 of them are the sons of people like I covered as a beat writer. I covered DeJuan, DJ's father, at Memphis. I covered Billy Richmond Sr., Billy Richmond Jr.'s father at Memphis. I really covered Billy Richmond in high school all the way back to when he was a prep star. And then, of course, Adu Thiero, I covered his father, El Mami, when he was at Memphis. So there's a lot of Kentucky connections here, but also more broadly speaking, just a lot of John Calipari connections to this first Arkansas team he's going to have. And you're exactly right. Like when I say it's a top 20 team on paper, I mean that it should be. And if there are skeptics out there, I understand, because I imagine what you would say is, well, my God, GP, he had 2 top 10 picks on his team last season. And, I watched the Oakland game and he hadn't been to a Final Four since 2015. Like I understand, I get it. I'm just saying that just because it hadn't worked well for John Calipari recently, consistently, doesn't mean that it never worked well for John Calipari. He did go to 4 Final Fours at Kentucky. And I think he's got a roster right now with, 3 projected starters who started all season last season for NCAA tournament teams. Like the way Kentucky finished was awful, and it led to a lot of different changes throughout college basketball. But they were a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. It's not like that team was terrible, even if it was perhaps a bit disappointing and incredibly disappointing at the end. But like DJ Wagner started for a team that was a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. Johnell Davis started first for a Final Four team and then for an FAU team that made a second straight trip to the NCAA tournament. And Jonas Adu, he started for a Tennessee team that, produced the SEC Player of the Year and was a legitimate Final Four contender. So when you have 3 guys who started for really good teams last season, that's a great place to start. And then you supplement it with, some 5-star or at least top 30 level freshmen in Boogie Flan and Billy Richmond and Carter Knox. Big Z transfers over. Like I said, Tierro's a 3rd-year player who, was a real rotation piece for a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. He'll add some more, probably won't get to 13, but just based on what they got on paper, that looks like a team that should be among the favorites, not the favorite, but among the favorites in the SEC.
Yeah, and I would add to GP that, there's obviously some appeal. Like DJ Wagner is a starter. He played in the SEC, former 5-star recruit. He's got great credentials. It also feels like maybe a little bit of a downside with his resume as well, because last season at Kentucky, you mentioned 2 projected top 10 picks on this roster, Rob Dillingham and Reed Sheppard. For the most part, all season, were not starting for Kentucky. They were by far, if you look at pivot analysis, by far the most effective players in terms of on-off metrics. And both all season basically came off the bench, except for a few times because of injury. Wagner rated worst on the team in those metrics with pivot analysis. Started almost every single game. If you look at Bart Torvik's numbers, rated Wagner as the least efficient player for Kentucky on offense. And he was team worst with a 45.9% effective field goal percentage, 49.6% true shooting percentage. He had an ankle injury, and obviously he's a freshman, so I think there's some adjustment, and I still believe in DJ Wagner, but just maybe some context to keep in mind if you're Arkansas, that there's a lot to like about DJ Wagner. I think he's a future NBA player, but the fact that he was starting for Kentucky last season over Reed Sheppard and Rob Dillingham, like, I'm not probably reading too much into that.
Take your college basketball hat off for a second. Put on your NBA draft hat. There was a moment where DJ Wagner was ranked as the number 1 player in his high school class. When I saw him very early, I mean, I can remember actually sitting in a gym in Vegas at an event, and there's a young DJ Wagner there. I'm sitting with Wani, with Cal, with Tony Barbie, with I think Arthur Barclay was there, who was a teammate of Wani's at Camden, who also came to Memphis. Like, literally people I've known for 20. It was kind of a sweet moment, like, watching Wani's son, and he looked the part, man. I mean, if you'd have told me, fast forward 3 years and that guy's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft, I would have been like, yeah, I could see it. In fact, I think I said that on this podcast way back then when I watched Jalen Duren. I said, I just don't see the number 1 pick in the draft. And that became a thing. But sort of to hammer home my point, I was like, now when I watch DJ Wagner, I do see somebody who could be the number 1 pick in the draft. And now if he were in this draft, he might not get picked. You touched on a lot of it there. But like, just adding to that, what happened?
He wasn't terribly efficient. His offensive numbers were not great. Like I said, they were the worst on the team in terms of effective field goal percentage and true shooting percentage. He's not the most athletic combo guard, and I think if you're projecting like what he's going to be from high school to the college level, you're thinking, okay, well he's a good sized guard who can dribble, who can pass, who can shoot, and defensively, I think size wise, I think he'll hold up pretty well. And if you look at kind of the lineup data from last season, I think Cal probably stuck with Wagner as one of the starters, in part because one of the best lineups defensively for Kentucky involved DJ Wagner. But offensively, I think he trailed a little bit, struggled to shoot the ball, struggled getting downhill. And I think he didn't really have a ton of confidence as well. There's a huge leap going from high school to college. And I think we probably underestimate that because we've seen guys like Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett, some guys who made the leap and made it look effortless. That was not the case with DJ Wagner. It's not the case with every highly touted 5-star recruit. So I think this will be a good kind of transition year for him. He's a little bit older, a little bit more wiser. This is a system that I think is set up for him to maybe to thrive in a little bit more. But certainly, I think last season, given the expectations as a 5-star recruit, someone who could be a potential lottery pick, it was pretty much worst case scenario for him in terms of where his draft stock is as we sit here right now.
Yeah, I know this wasn't his plan to be a second-year player at Arkansas. After a relatively speaking disappointing freshman year, but sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes these 5-star freshmen who, for whatever reason, spend a second year in college, like that can be a breakthrough for them. And perhaps it'll be for DJ. Either way, like I said, I've got Arkansas up to 16th in the top 25 and one, and that would actually put them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th in the SEC. Because right now I have it, if I'm ranking them in order, Alabama, then Auburn, then Texas A&M, then Tennessee, then Arkansas, followed by Florida and Texas. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams in the top 25 and one come from the SEC. Tennessee, of course, just recently getting a commitment from Chaz Lanier, adding another experienced piece who is going to give Rick Barnes an opportunity to make yet another NCAA tournament and perhaps position Tennessee to try to make what would be the first Final Four in history. So the SEC is super strong right now. You could make the argument that Alabama should be the favorite no matter what, but they'll be in the Crimson Tide an undeniable favorite if Mark Sears withdraws from the draft. Based on everything you've watched, heard in recent weeks, what do you guess the status of Mark Sears, and how likely is it you think he remains in the draft and or goes back to Alabama for one more season?
Yeah, I think it's probably more likely than not that he comes back to college. He had a great season at Alabama. He's produced at a level that I think should warrant some consideration in the NBA draft, but saw him a little bit at the NBA draft combine, and I think he fared mostly well. But in this draft, it's kind of a drop off. I think once you get to like maybe the early 30s, it's difficult to project who will and who will not get guaranteed contracts. I talked with someone from who works with the NBA here recently, and they said basically like they probably are not expecting a ton of guys in the second round to get guaranteed contracts. And so there's going to be a lot of, two ways, exhibit 10s, those type of deals where they're non-guaranteed contracts. And I think probably Mark Sears, given his notoriety as, one of the faces of college basketball this last season, and given the potential to be that again next season, there's probably a lot of money to be made for him, whether he comes back to Alabama or not. And so I would project him as, a mid to late second rounder, maybe undrafted. You have to weigh that possibility of, maybe going to a team that is going to give you a non-guaranteed contract, or cashing a potentially huge bag, being one of the faces of college basketball. Like, just on paper, if you think about that and put yourself in his shoes, that's a pretty appealing situation that I think would be really difficult for Mark Sears to turn down at Alabama.
I always do think about that, and I don't ever want to pretend that I know exactly what I would do if I were Mark Sears, because it's ridiculous for any human to think you would know what any other human would do unless you're actually in the situation they find themselves in. But one of the ways I've always thought I would look at it is like, if you're Mark Sears, and I don't want to put a ceiling on anybody, but if your goal is to play in the NBA and you get to the NBA, here is the hard truth. You will probably never be the best player on your team again. All right. In the rest of your life. That's true for everybody who goes to the NBA. You will probably never be the best player on your team again. All right. Now that's if you're in the NBA. So if you're in the NBA, you're going to spend at least the next year sitting on the bench. You'll be making a nice paycheck, but you're probably going to be on the bench. That's if you're in the NBA. You could also end up in the G League, and that is a bunch of commercial flights, playing in front of nobody, night after night after night. It's not a glamorous life. It's it doesn't seem fun. Now compare that to what you could be if you come back to Alabama. Okay. Maybe preseason national player of the year. I don't know if they still do all the magazines, but if they do, and they print them, he's going to be all over them. Preseason SEC Player of the Year. I don't usually play hypotheticals with the top 25 and 1, but right now I have Mark Sears projected gone from Alabama, and Alabama 9th in the top 25 and 1. The moment he announces, if he announces he's coming back, I will probably move Alabama all the way up to number 2, behind Kansas. So you got an opportunity to come back to school, maybe be a preseason National Player of the Year, maybe be the actual National Player of the Year, maybe lead Alabama to a Final Four again, maybe win a national. There's just a lot of stuff that if you walk away from it, I understand, but you are walking away from a lot of once in a lifetime opportunity stuff. And oh, by the way, this might not used to have been a difficult decision for some, because the counter to all of it would have been, yeah, but I'll be making hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, if I leave. And, unless we're breaking rules, I can't really do that in college. Well, now, I can't put a number on it, but you talk to people around the SEC, they'll tell you Alabama's got as good of resources as anybody else in the SEC, anybody else in the country. So, Mark Sears will probably be a millionaire if he plays basketball at Alabama next season. All right. In addition to all the other stuff that comes along with that. So again, he's a smart young man. He's surrounded by good people. They can make the best decision for them, and I'll root for him like crazy. But those were, I would say this, if he were my son, these are the types of things I would be trying to stress to him. Like, just understand what it is you're walking to and what it is you're walking away from. And know that if you walk away from this, it could be brilliant, but you would be walking away from some really special opportunities that most people never get and you would never get again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and we can't put ourselves exactly in Mark Sears' shoes. We don't know if he wants to pursue more school, if he hates school.
That's the other thing. Yeah, it might just be like, dude, I can never log into a class again. I'm done with this. I understand all of it. I don't judge anybody's decision. I just say these are the types of things I would be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine like Mark Sears just put up like 30 and 10 in an SEC game, and he's like logging in like, oh, great response. Loved your conversation on da da da. Like, that's got to be so monotonous as a star of college basketball to still be going and doing group chats on school, like online school. That's just crazy to think about. So yeah, we'll see what happens with Mark Sears, obviously, but whether stays or goes, I think he's going to cash in a big way, and coming back to school would make a lot of sense for him.
Either way, SEC is going to be stacked. Like I said, 7 teams currently in the top 25 and 1. The headliner, Alabama at number 9, but Arkansas, with the commitment from DJ Wagner, has moved into the top 20, specifically at number 16. Some sad news on Memorial Day. College basketball icon passed away at the age of 71. Rest in peace, Bill Walton. We'll spend a few minutes on the UCLA legend. We'll do that next. But first, a word from our partner. Sad news on Memorial Day. Bill Walton, the UCLA legend, died of cancer at the age of 71. He, as I'm sure you know, spent his final years as an entertaining color analyst for ESPN. But before that, he was quite literally one of the best basketball players in the world. He was a 3-time National Player of the Year at UCLA, a 2-time national champion at UCLA, 2-time NBA champion with the Blazers and Celtics, a 2-time NBA All-Star, Finals MVP in 1977, League MVP in 1978. Poor health robbed him of so much, both in basketball and just life in general. But when he was healthy enough to do his job, either on the court or later in life off of it, he was just truly excellent at his job. KB, I won't ask you for your memories of Bill Walton as a player, because you're a young fella and you shouldn't have any. But when I say Bill Walton, what pops into your head?
A ray of light is what pops into my head, man. Over the years covering college basketball, I love the sport. You get to like the heart of conference play, it can feel like a little bit of a slog, right? You're staying up all day, you're staying up all night watching Pac-12 games, and it's like it can just be kind of a challenge sometimes to power through. And I just remember a lot of times it's like a long day. You're logging in, to the Pac-12 network on your television, of course, or on your refrigerator if you're GP, and Bill Walton and Dave Pasch are there, man. And I just like some of the best and most fond memories watching basketball and being entertained from Bill Walton. After a long day of covering sports, I'd turn it on and he's eating a fully lit cupcake next to Dave Pasch, or talking about the earth or nature, or about life, and he could be serious, and he could be sincere, and he had so many different levels and ranges that he was such a deep person, and the way that he experienced things, I think, was very genuine. And it certainly, I think it came natural for him to be kind of an entertainer, but that's who he was. And there was an ESPN interview that I think is probably going viral on Twitter, and one quote that I saw from it was, the sun comes up every day, and my approach is, what can I do to make things better for as many people as possible? And I feel like that's it's cliche, and certainly I like, if I could adapt that and apply it, that's a great way to live. But it really felt like he genuinely felt that way. He genuinely applied that, and he lived by that. And he was just a joyful person who was fun to watch. By all accounts, everyone who experienced him, whether it's working with him or just being a friend, or playing on a Pac-12 team, and him calling one of your games, like everyone who experienced him just adored him. Genuine, authentic, to who he was at all times. Sometimes it was funny, sometimes it was downright weird. Always, though, it was entertaining, and I will miss Bill Walton in college basketball. Very thoughtful, curious, compassionate, caring, just a great human being who, it feels like the world is a slightly worse place because he's not here anymore.
Yeah, it was just sort of obviously a sad thing to learn. Um, I didn't know Bill well. I met him a few times, was around him a few times. I certainly wasn't in his circle. I didn't realize that the end was so near. And so when I saw it, I was like, "What?" And then I guess I knew he had been sick. I don't know. It wasn't something I was expecting to see on Memorial Day. So when I saw it, it was sad, because I did know Luke, his son, a little bit. And I'm with you on Bill as a broadcaster. I know that it got sometimes a little too off the rails for some folks, but man, I can appreciate a traditional color analyst who's just there talking about how we're guarding ball screens and just breaking down the game. Like, I love that stuff. Like, I think Tim Legler, when he goes on ESPN post game, like, if I don't watch those things live, I watch them the next morning, because I just think he's so good, breaking down exactly what is happening in a basketball game.
Yes.
And I have a real appetite for that. Like, I consume it, I enjoy it, but I don't need it every minute of every game. At the end of the day, I'm watching a basketball game on television. I'd like to enjoy it. And Bill Walton made me enjoy it more than I otherwise would have, by being exactly the opposite of what Tim Legler would do if on a game, right? Like, Tim's there to talk about basketball, and Bill, it felt like sometimes, was there to talk about anything other than basketball. And I would sometimes you hear him go on these little things, and he just starts telling a story. It starts in this little place. The next thing you know, he's telling an incredible 2-minute story. And it's like, how does he know all this stuff? Like, how does a person even know all these things? And he's just sort of, casually telling them, or at least it came across that way. It could have you never know the work people put into these things, but the way it came across is like, oh, here's Bill Walton just telling another wild story that's got nothing to do with this basketball game, but somehow this is perfect. I I enjoyed it. And then, of course, I was introduced to him just as a figure very early in life, based on where I grew up, because he had maybe the greatest college basketball game ever.
Yeah.
In the national championship game against Memphis State University. Now, of course, the University of Memphis. So when I'm growing up in, this area and everybody here is a Tiger basketball fan, Keith Lee and Andre Turner or, pushing the Tigers to the 1985 Final Four. It's like this is the first time they're in the Final Four since the last time. The last time was 73. And you remember what happened then? Oh, that's the Bill Walton game. He was 21 of 22 from the field.
It's insane.
21 of 22 from the field, 44 points, 13 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 block. That was in the national championship game. UCLA 87, Memphis State 66. I believe the game was tied at halftime, and then UCLA just ran away from them. But 21 of 22 from the field. I mean, it's outrageous. So he was like he's just always been a figure in just conversations that happened around me. And even then you go like Memphis is back in the Final Four in 2008. It's the first time since 85 and only third time in history. The first was 73. Always circles back to that's the Bill Walton game. And Walton, he obviously talked about this his whole life, or at least he gets asked about it his whole life. And I saw one quote as I was reading about it last night. He said John Wooden was talking to him at some point after that game or later in life or whenever. But this is Bill Walton telling the story. He said, Coach Wooden looked at me and he said, Walton, I used to think you were a good player until you missed that one shot against Memphis State. So that was just a sweet little quote. So, I mean, it's hard for, I think, younger people to understand like what this looked like back then, because Bill Walton comes to college basketball today. We get him for 1 year. That's it. I mean, it's almost like amazing that we had 2-time National Player of the Year, Zach Edey. Well, like Bill Walton was 3-time National Player of the Year. Like this was another level to everything. Truly, like he was on the NBA's all-time greatest 50 team, top 75 team. Genuinely one of the greatest basketball players to ever live, who had an incredible career post basketball. And you mentioned just such a ray of light, and he really did come across that way. And he had an incredible approach to life. But even he has acknowledged that he did struggle too, and was in a dark place for some time, and even contemplated ending his life at one point, which is obviously something that's been in the news this weekend in sports because of a tragedy on the PGA Tour. And so I just, he's just a fascinating character who lived a fascinating life. And man, it sucks that it only lasted 71 years. Life's not fair, obviously. But he made an incredible impact that and has a lasting legacy. And like I said, I didn't know him particularly well, but I was a real fan of his work and his approach to life. And I am friends with a lot of people who were close to him and loved him dearly. And so obviously our thoughts are with those people. Yeah.
And there was a lot of death over the weekend, and it's heavy. It's heavy to think about the Grayson Murray and Bill Walton, Harry Higgs, who won on the Korn Ferry Tour this weekend. I wrote it down just because I didn't think we'd probably mention the tragedy on the PGA Tour. But Harry Higgs, after he won this weekend, I thought he said something that really stuck with me. He said, "I would challenge everybody here. I'm going to do this myself as well. Say something nice to someone you love, and make it a point to say something nice to someone you do not even know. The world is a very difficult place. The world is difficult and only getting more difficult. So everybody could be a difference. Brighten up someone's day. It could mean the world." And, I think just thinking about that and thinking about it in the context of Bill Walton's death, like that's how he lived his life. He was someone who always brightened someone's day. He always brightened my day when he popped on the television, just because I had absolutely no idea what he was going to say, what he was going to talk about. But love each other, love the people around you, love the people that you don't know, and that stuck with me. That's something I'm going to think about for a long time.
And no, I watched the Harry Higgs clip. I thought he was great and like clearly just off the cuff, and a guy who like he knows Grayson, and like they probably grinded it out, and spent a lot of days and nights together. And I've been there. You're like, I'll check in on him tomorrow, or I'm sure he'll be okay. And then it's just not. And so I thought that was incredible. It was sort of funny. Like he says, Harry Hicks is like, hey, just take the time to say something nice to somebody you don't know, right?
Yeah.
Try to make somebody feel better. And I'm like, man, what a great message. And I went to sleep and I woke up, and the first tweet I saw this morning from somebody was like, these rankings are just as lazy as always. I'm like, Harry Higgs is telling people to be nice, and some other guy, the first thing he does when he wakes up is tell me how my rankings suck.
Oh my God. Never fails.
So not everybody is subscribed to the Harry Higgs way of life yet, but hopefully we'll get there. Hopefully we'll take a step in the right direction at some point soon.
I hope so.
I hope so too. So KB, hey, I appreciate you being here on a Tuesday morning that feels like a Monday morning. It's a Tuesday morning that feels like a Monday morning. And like I said, I hope everybody had a safe and fun holiday weekend. Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Shouts to Terry Teagle, legend. Huck Larnell. Thank you guys once again for watching, listening to the Eye on College Basketball podcast. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, including Apple and Spotify. More of us than there are of them. That should be reflected in the comments. So take care of us, and we'll talk to you again real soon.